Hello and welcome to session 2 of the public policy making module. And this session, the title of the session is Ideology and Public Policy. Ideology and Public Policy. The first topic in this session is, what is ideology? Ideology is a set of ideas or beliefs that underpin a social, economic, and political system. Ideology is a worldview that allows an individual or group both to interpret the way things are and to suggest the way things ought to be. Ideologies are guide to political action that give us ideals to believe in, goals to strive for, and tell for what causes to fight. Ideology is a collection of ideas held by an individual, group, or society. Ideology is a set of conscious and unconscious ideas that make up one's belief, expectations, and motivations. Ideology is a comprehensive normative vision that is considered the concrete way by the majority of population. Ideology is a set of ideas proposed by the dominant class of society, such as the elite for all members of society. Ideology is a system of abstracted meaning applied to society, thus making this concept central to politics. Now, ideology and policy prescriptions is the second topic here. Different ideological viewpoints offers dissimilar policy prescriptions on the balance between individual and collective rights and responsibility in society, the relationship between women and men, and their nature and the nature of the family, the virtue of the market economy and the acceptability of economic inequality and poverty, the importance of domestic processes and participation, the relationship between human civilization and nature. Market-focused ideologies. Now, the ideologies I'm going to describe that have bearing on public policy making are three. The first one is what we call market-focused ideology, which is subdivided into two classes. We have what we call pure neoclassical market ideology, which is the libertarian ideology, and then the neoclassical philosophy or ideology. Market-focused ideologies stress the importance of free markets. They advise against state intrusion and control. A primary articulation of this view emanated from a French term, laissez-faire. And laissez-faire literally means leave them to do. Laissez-faire was first used in the 18th century as a sanction against government interference with trade. In laissez-faire viewpoint, the state's role is to ensure that nothing interferes with the working of the market. So let's look at the first strand in the market-focused school. And that first strand in the market-focused school is what we call libertarianism. The laissez-faire doctrine is referred to as libertarianism. Libertarianism advocates a free market view. It argues that capitalism will be a panacea to inefficiencies than government intervention. Adam Smith, one of the founders of economics, identifies with libertarianism. Smith argues that the invisible hand of the market will guide people to act in their self-interest. The self-interest behavior produces spontaneous social order that secures the public interest. Smith argues that the uninterrupted market is the generator of wealth obstructed only by government intervention. However, Smith concedes that not all areas can be entirely left to the market. Areas like national security, individual security, and public works cannot efficiently be provided by the market. Libertarians trust in individual responsibility. They believe the state should only intervene to protect citizens from coercion, interference, and discrimination. Libertarians insist on the state providing only negative rights. And when we talk about negative rights, we refer to the system of justice associated with law, order, and protective services such as the police, courts, prisons, probation, rehabilitation services. There is thus minimal need for public finance if we use the libertarian philosophy. Libertarians argue that there is no such thing as social justice. A person's life chances are a result of market outcomes. These outcomes may be fortunate for some, unfortunate for others, but they are not unfair. They simply reflect an individual's innate abilities to earn a livelihood through flair, initiative, and hard work. Charitable work rather than state action should be relied upon to help those who are unfortunate and lacking innate abilities for self-support. To libertarians, there is no moral case for equality. There is no such thing as society. There is no need for modern welfare state. There is no need for public finance and public policy other than law and order, defense, and to relieve destitution. Rather, the private sector should provide individuals and their household with services they are willing and able to pay for. Libertarians contend that state intervention is counterproductive. It stifles individual initiative and destroys charitable giving. State intervention establishes a dependency culture. Dependency is worsened by moral hazards whereby individuals change their behavior as a result of being insured, being less cautious than their attitudes and respond to race. Libertarians insist that government cannot be trusted to act responsibly. They claim that the state is corruptible. They believe government operate for their own sake rather than meant to serve the interests of the generality of the population. But libertarians have a problem, because if we are to rely completely on libertarian philosophy, it means that there are individuals who, for no fault of theirs, cannot function in the marketplace. So how are these people supposed to fend for themselves? If we also rely completely on libertarian philosophy, and it says that those who cannot fend for themselves must have charitable giving, how about those who are supposed to give charity if they don't give charity? What should those who cannot function in the marketplace actually do? But even in current times, there is no political philosophy or ideology that is completely right or completely left, because most of them are all coalescing towards the center. So modern political parties are either left center or right center. So nobody is purely left and nobody is purely center. So the libertarian philosophy has serious problems, and if we are going to apply it in its classical form, then many society cannot function effectively today. And that is why there is a new version of the libertarian philosophy called Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism tried to tame the rough edges of the classical libertarian philosophy. The resurgence of laissez-faire economics was variously termed as neoclassical economics, neoliberalism, neoconservatism, new right, economic rationalism. Each of these terms just are synonyms to neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is an offshoot of libertarianism. Its focus is on individual rights and freedoms. Neoliberals contended that by the end of the 20th century, there was too much government. There was evident in several important respects. So this big government was manifested in several important areas. One, government were taxing too much, thereby penalizing those generating wealth. Governments were borrowing too much, thereby reducing the amount of capital available. Governments were spending too much, example on social services. Government were regulating too much, bringing about the decline in investment. Government were also doing too much, although private enterprise was believed to be more efficient. Government were also providing too much protection. Tariff and other regulations were making the market less efficient. Some business sectors were less competitive. So that was the attack of the neoliberals on the pure libertarian philosophy. And therefore, the solutions that neoliberals suggested to remove the ills of the purely libertarian philosophy was: one, lowering taxes, flattening the tax structure, taxing consumption rather than income. Budget surpluses should be used to retire debt rather than spending on public services and infrastructure. Reducing government expenditure, particularly on welfare and social services. Reducing legislative safeguards in areas such as health and environmental standards. Selling off government business enterprises to private owners. Reducing or eliminating tariffs and other trade barriers. Abolishing centralized wage fixing. Deregulating markets to allow competition to determine prices. So what exactly are the defining features of neoliberalism? The defining features are: one, there must be primacy of the individual. By primacy of the individual, I mean each individual must be allowed to go to the marketplace to eke out a living for himself based on his flair, based on his talent, based on his initiative, and based on his experience. Modified markets. By modified markets, I mean that the individual and then the whole economy must only be ruled by Adam Smith's invisible forces. But government intervention is necessary only when the market is failing. If the market is doing very well, there is no need for government to intervene. And that is what we mean by modified markets. Negative plus positive rise. In other words, the negative rise has to do with the rules of the game of the market. The positive rise has to do with much more concrete things that people want for themselves. Like, for example, the provision of water, like, for example, the provision of other utilities like transport, defense, law and order, education, healthcare, energy, and all that. And that is what we refer to as positive rise. So neoliberals are saying that, unlike the liberals who are saying that the government should provide only negative rise, they concede that the provision of only negative rise will not make society to function efficiently, and that some amount of positive rise to be provided by government is also very, very essential. Then the fourth option or future of the neoliberals is what we refer to as enabling state. And what is that enabling state? The enabling state is for the state to provide the right environment for the market enterprises to thrive, meaning that businesses operating must not be boarded or bogged down by heavy taxes. Businesses operating must not be boarded by so much regulation. Government must remove all these regulations and enable the private sector to function efficiently to provide the goods and services that people need. Then the last feature is what we refer to as mixed economy. The mixed economy is one in which there is some amount of private ownership of capital and some amount of government provision of services. So there must be private provision of services, but there must also be government provision of services. Government should only provide only very basic essential services and leave the rest to the market for the market to do. And that is why we refer to as the mixed economy. So what are the beliefs of the neoliberals? Neoliberals believe that the state is a necessary evil. Why is the state a necessary evil? The state is a necessary evil because, on one hand, the state is needed when the market collapses or is not able to perform efficiently and effectively. In that instance, the market needs the state. But the market must be allowed to operate when it is operating very, very well, and it doesn't need the state. So if the government is intervening when the market is operating very well, then it is an unnecessary intrusion. And that's why we say that the state is a necessary evil. On one hand, when the market is not working, we need government to put it right. And we saw the real estate bubble in the US, we saw the Asian economic crisis in 2001, and all these required government intervention to bring back the market into shape. And we looked at the US. During the bubble, they introduced what they call quantitative easing, where government pumped in a lot of money to help struggling private sector enterprises to come back onto their feet and then to start producing again. So that is why we say the state is a necessary evil. Come in when the market is struggling, but leave the market alone to function when it is doing very, very well. Then the second belief is taxation for efficiency. In the pure libertarian philosophy, they don't even believe in taxation, and they believe that taxation is theft, taxation is confiscation, but neoliberals believe that some amount of taxation is good, but that taxation should not be in a progressive form where the rich are penalized hugely and then the money so derived is used to sponsor the less privileged or the poorer sections in society. So tax them, but tax them minimally so that they can plow back their profits and invest. That is what we mean by taxation for efficiency. Then promotion of human capital. There are people who cannot function in the market, not because they don't have skills and other things, but their skills have become redundant, their skills have become outdated, their skills have become obsolete, and they need to retool, retrain, redevelop so that they can function efficiently and effectively in the market. And neoliberals believe that the state has a responsibility to help these people to retrain, to retool, to re-strategize so that they can acquire the human capital needed for today's market. Then the next belief is equality of opportunity. And equality opportunity simply means providing a leveling playing field for all individuals, enterprises within the system so that everybody can go after his potential as far as he or she can. The state should not be in the business of discriminating. The state should not be in the business of providing opportunities for some and less opportunities for others. Opportunities should be freely available to all who can struggle to reach their potential. When you do that, then we are able to unearth talents, and these talents will help the nation to grow efficiently and effectively. And that is what we mean by equality of opportunity. Then we have property rights reflects policy aims. People have the right to acquire property once they work hard for it. The state has no business in confiscating private property and genuinely. And therefore, property rights reflect that once somebody has earned his money genuinely in the market through hard work, the state should protect it rather than take strategies to really take it away from them. So that is what we mean. So what are the general implications of neoliberalism? The first one is weak conception of society. And what that weak conception of society means is that the state is not a Father Christmas. The state is not a state that must provide everything that people in society want. The state must only be an enabler for all individuals within the society. And therefore, individual members of society should not rely on the state and say that collectively the state must provide and collectively we must consume because the state has provided. Each individual has to go out and eke out a living. But they concede. In case they cannot make it through no fault of theirs, then the state has a responsibility to come and help people out. And therefore, let's live together and work together is very, very important. But every individual has a responsibility, even though we emphasize teamwork. Then the second point is modified market rights. And what are these modified market rights? Whilst pure libertarians believe that only negative rights should be provided in the market, the neoliberals believe that there should be some amount of negative rights and an amount of positive rights. And I've already explained the positive rights, and I said that they involve things like the provision of healthcare, provision of hospitals, provision of schools, provision of utilities like water, and the rest. So if we provide these goods, in addition to providing the safe environment and the rules of the game for the market to operate, then we call that modified market right. Then the next implication is individual primary consumers. Libertarians believe that if each individual goes to the market and works very, very hard and be able to extract what he or she wants from the market, work very hard, get the income in the market, then you have the means to purchase anything that you want. And therefore, you can purchase housing for yourself, you can purchase heating for yourself, you can purchase water for yourself, you can purchase transport for yourself, and that should not be the responsibility of the state. The state only helps you only when you cannot function. But individually, we have a responsibility to eke out a living, and once we earn an income, then we become consumers for other goods and services that are available in the system. Then the last one is state supplements charity or voluntary action. Unlike pure libertarians who say that the state should not be in the business of charity giving, the state must leave charity organizations to provide for those who cannot function for no fault of theirs in the market. Neoliberals believe that the state has a responsibility to provide some amount of charity for those who cannot function. And that charity is what we refer to as safety nets. These safety nets are very, very important because there are some within society who, for no fault of theirs, cannot function effectively. So state must provide these safety nets in addition or to complement what voluntary organizations are doing within society. So what are the implications of neoliberalism for the public sector? Heavily constrained state. And this heavily constrained state means that the state is prevented from intervening in the market and must only intervene when there is the need for it. That is what we mean by heavily constrained state. Then some limited positive rights. Yes, some amount of positive rights are important. For example, providing water, providing subsidized education. That is very, very important. But the citizen also has some contribution to make towards his own welfare and should not rely on the state to provide everything for him. Then private or public sector provision. There should be a combination of public and private sector provision of goods. The provision should not be left to the private sector alone, nor to the public sector alone. But heavily, the private sector must be in the lead, and the public sector will complement what the private sector is doing. Then there is what we call conditional welfare state. Conditional in the sense that you don't qualify for welfare if you can function effectively in the market, but you have refused to function. The state should not help you. But if for no fault of yours, you can't function in the marketplace and you need help, then the state has a responsibility to provide that help. Then public plus private insurance. We as individuals have responsibility for ourselves throughout our working life and into our retirement life. And that is why we're encouraged to make some savings during our working life so that when we retire, we can rely on some part of it for our insurance. But the state also has a responsibility to help us by contributing some portion towards our retirement so that when we retire, we can still live very decent lives and not live lives of paupers. Then implications of liberalism for public policy. What are its implications for public policy? Its implications for public policy are at least 5. 1, restricted public finance, meaning that if the state does not spend on almost everybody for everything, then the state can save some money to do some other things. The second one means seeking additional public spending. Then public spending is only necessary only when we see that the private sector is not providing some of the things that they should be providing. Then tax bad, not goods for efficiency. What this means is that if you overtax the market, the economic agents in the markets, then the market is not going to function efficiently and effectively, because what tax does is that it increases the cost of production of producers. And that will mean that if you increase the cost of production for producers, they will simply pass on the cost to consumers in the form of higher prices. And that is why they say that these higher prices are not good for efficiency, not for production, and not for consumption. So tax, but tax at the minimal level. Introduction of proportional taxes. And proportional taxes are taxes that are levied in a way that both who are earning low and those who are earning high pay some amount of taxes. They all bear some brand of the burden of tax, rather than allowing the rich only to bear a huge proportion of the tax. Those who are also low income and middle income earners must also bear some responsibility or burden of the tax, rather than producing what we call a progressive taxation system, where the burden of the tax, a huge bulk of the burden of the tax, is passed on to only the rich. Then the last one is what we call borrowing for efficiency purposes. Borrowing is a double-edged sword. On one hand, if you borrow and the borrowing goes to recurrent expenditure, then you are burdening not only present generation, but future generations with a debt that they cannot bear. Then it contributes to what we call intergenerational equity problem of debt. So present generations should not borrow money, squander it, and leave the burden for future generations to pay. If you are borrowing, borrow to invest in infrastructure, borrow to invest in productive ventures so that present generations can enjoy it, and then future generations will also come and enjoy it. And therefore, borrowing is good, according to libertarians, neoliberals, but the borrowing should go into capital expenditure rather than into recurrent expenditure. So what are the limitations of neoliberalism? Neoliberals also have some faults. The first point is that individual rights to state assistance is contingent upon responsibility for self-sufficiency. What this means is that if I'm in the market and I'm not able to function very, very well for no fault of mine, and I've been looking for a job and I cannot get, then the state has a right or responsibility to provide for me. But you want to see what I have earned myself in the market before you give me the aid that I need. How about if I have looked throughout the whole year and I cannot find a job? Does it mean that I don't qualify for assistance? That is the question we raise in relation to the neoliberals' idea of self-sufficiency. Then the second point is, state is not a definite recourse in terms of need. It means that if you rely on the state, there are so many people, particularly in a situation of growing population, the state cannot provide everything because there is scarcity of funds. And if we want to rely completely on the state may fail us and may refuse or we will be unable to provide what we need. Equality of outcomes will not be achieved. So if we are saying that, well, go and function in the market and get whatever you want, what you get is what you deserve. How about those who cannot function for themselves, for no fault of theirs? And if the state is not also providing the means, then where is the outcomes? We are not going to have the equality of outcomes that we will be wishing for. The next one is people's innate abilities, flair, and work effort vary. Now, libertarians refuse to concede that in the market, our abilities, our flair, our talents are different. And we are not all the same. Some people are clever, some people are more versatile, and others are less versatile. And therefore, it is only natural that we are going to earn different levels of income because of our different efforts that we put in. And therefore, should those who cannot earn, for no fault of theirs, even though they are earning, but it's not enough, and they cannot survive with the meager things they are earning, should the state not help them to function? That is the important question that we ask. And the neoliberals have no answer to such a question. Neoliberals' conception of society is not encompassing. What we mean is that in terms of a purely collectivist philosophy, we expect the state to help us collectively to produce and collectively to consume so that there will be equity in the production of everything. But that is not happening here in the neoliberals camp. So they say that there is a society, but that conception of society is a weak one. It is unclear whether state intervention makes markets work better or worse. Now, what this point says is that neoliberals tend to think that market intervention by the state will make the state function if there is time for the state to intervene. So it is unclear whether the state intervention makes markets to work better or to work worse. There are instances where market intervention by the state leads to worse outcomes. But there are also instances where market interventions lead to very efficient and desirable outcomes. So how about situations where government intervention leads to the worst outcomes? That is the criticism people raise. Now, the last point is neoliberalism produces weakness in both culture and civil society. If you emphasize the individual, and you don't emphasize the collective, you don't emphasize people in groups, then it means that we'll only be autonomous individuals roaming this earth without association with each other. And that is not what we want as a society. The next one is what we call socialism. Socialism is the third option in terms of the philosophies that govern public policy. And this socialism, others refer to it as collectivism. What exactly is socialism or collectivism? Socialism preaches a contrasting view to liberalism. It advocates a state controlled by the people. It was occasioned in the 19th century by inequality, the exploitative nature of capitalism, invocation of a revolutionary transformation of the state. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were the architects of socialism. The mode of production influences power relations. Socialists argue that capitalism is unjust because the means of production is owned by a few elites. These elites exploited the working masses. The masses sold their labor but had no control over the distribution of society's resources and benefits. Masses believe that the exploitation of labor will provide the motivation for a revolution to overthrow capital. Ownership of the means of production influences the distribution of power and resources. Socialists predicted the revolution to eliminate class and poverty, private property. Class and property will be replaced by a social economic system controlled by the people. The revolution has not occurred, and classes still exist. Owners of capital are still few. However, issues about equity and equality have become salient. So the prediction of socialists that the capitalist system will fall and then we'll have an egalitarian society where in this egalitarian society, everybody will live relatively well and better off and there will be no classes, has not really happened. Labor power is boosted by unionization and threats of industrial action. People have full, not limited positive rights as citizens. These are in addition to negative rights as consumers. Now, whilst libertarians and neoliberals believe that there should be no or there should be only limited positive rights, socialists believe that the state must provide not only negative rights but positive rights. Full positive rights and full negative rights. That is what socialists believe in. So, in the socialist doctrine, private property rights are replaced by social ownership. Private profits must be at the expense of social welfare. The state cannot be a passive onlooker whilst markets allocate resources by chance. Equality of opportunity cannot secure socially acceptable outcomes. That is what the socialists believe. Those outcomes cannot be assured by the enabling state of neoliberalism. The state rather should be the provider state. The attendant collective benefit more than offsets the associated moral hazards and dependency culture. Public policy is controlled as is public finance. The state planning is more effective than modified or unfettered markets. Thus, social rather than economic welfare is the approach to public policy. Public policy is geared in favor of disadvantaged and low-income groups within society. So, what are the defining features of socialism? One, there is mutual dependence. In other words, we depend on each other for our collective good. There should be some amount of sharing of ideas, of effort, and then of outcomes. That is what we mean by mutual dependence. We help each other out. There is rejection of markets. The socialists believe that markets are the root cause of all the problems for society, and therefore the state should provide and the state should intervene in the market at all times. Full positive rights exist. The state should not only say that I'm going to provide limited positive like education, subsidized healthcare, but we are not talking about subsidization. We are talking about full provision of these services to citizens, irrespective of whether they can pay for them or they cannot pay for them. That is what we mean by full positive rights. The state is a provider state. So the state is like a father, the state is like a parent, and the state is supposed to provide for all that its children needs. Who are the citizens? Collectivism, rather than individualism, is emphasized. So we have to emphasize ourselves as collective rather than individuals. So what are the beliefs of socialism? The state is a benevolent state. That means that the state is very generous and is giving us all that we need as citizens. Taxes are raised to meet social objectives. When we raise taxes, it is because we want to provide the social amenities that people really want. There is building of social capital. Instead of private capital, we are talking about social capital here, where interaction, affinity, belongingness, togetherness should be the catchword. Equality of outcomes are emphasized. That is, whatever we produce, we must share it in a way that is equitable, that makes everybody happy. Then, property owning is theft. There is no need for individuals to accumulate wealth and keep the wealth to themselves alone whilst others are struggling to survive. When we create, we need to share this wealth in a way that is equitable so that everybody can have a decent style of existence. That is what they believe. General implications of socialism: society is emphasized, meaning that we are looking at ourselves as a collective, and collectively we will perform, and collectively we will consume, and collectively we will have welfare. We are not talking about individuals. State confers rights. So the state confers rights means that all the rights, positive and negative, emanates from the state, and the state must give it to its citizens. Citizens come first before anything else. We are citizens before we are consumers. And therefore, when we are citizens, we have rights. So we have rights, whether we have money to pay for what we want or not, we are citizens, and the state has a responsibility towards us. The state replaces charity. We are not talking about charity people giving, because charity organizations can refuse to give. And if they refuse to give, what will the citizens do? And therefore, the state has a responsibility, and it should not transfer that responsibility to another person. So what are the implications of socialism for public policy? The state is expansive. It means that if the state is supposed to provide everything, it means that the state will involve in huge expenditure in providing these goods and services that we need. There exists positive rights, meaning that everything that we need, and we say that it's not a education, health, transport, housing, they are rights. We are not going to call them privileges. And the state has a responsibility to provide them. There is public sector provision. The socialists suspect the motive of private capital. And they feel that private capital is only interested in making profit. And if you give them something to do, they will do and packet the surplus. And therefore, if you allow the private sector to do it, the public sector will provide everything that the citizen wants. Welfare is unconditional. Don't say that I'll give you welfare only when you cannot function in the market. The welfare is for everybody, and there should be no conditions attached. Everybody must benefit. There is public insurance. If we cannot function, if we need safety nets, then the state must be there to provide these safety nets. There is unrestrained public finance, meaning that public finance must go everywhere to provide whatever we want. And we must not be talking about economy, restriction of public finance, not making public finance to grow out of proportion. The state must provide it, provided it will use the money to provide everything we want. Even if the expenditure escalates, it doesn't matter, according to the socialists. Then there is what we call public spending replaces private spending, meaning that the state is the heart of everything, and the state must have the resources to provide the citizens with what they want, rather than the other way around. Redistributive taxes is instituted to achieve equity, meaning that even if you tax at all, then tax the rich more, and then use the money so collected to provide goods and services for those who are in the lower income bracket of society. Then the next one is tax structure is progressive. A progressive taxation system is a taxation system that imposes a heavy burden, tax burden on the rich, so that money so derived is used to provide services for the less privileged within society. Then the last one is what we refer to as borrowing is for financing welfare. When we borrow at all, then that money should be used to provide welfare. Unlike the libertarians and neoclassicals who say that when we borrow, the money should not go to recurrent expenditure, the money should go into only capital expenditure that provides the basis for future growth and wealth creation. But this is a complete departure from the neoliberals and then the liberal philosophy. They are saying that when we borrow, we must provide all welfare. Whether that welfare is going to generate more income, more goods, more wealth tomorrow or not, we need to provide whatever the citizens want. Now, there is a strand of socialism we call social democracy. What is social democracy? Social democracy grew out of the socialist movement. Social democrats believe capitalism can be reformed rather than overthrown. So, social democrats, unlike socialists, pure socialists, who think that capitalism should not exist at all and that only socialism should live, social democrats believe that some amount of capitalism is necessary. Otherwise, when we overthrow capitalism, who will produce the goods in the market? And therefore, capitalist system of production is necessary. So we should take steps not to overthrow capitalism, but we must take steps to reform it rather than wipe it off completely. The change will occur through state regulation and addressing inequality. So if the state comes in to regulate the market and address inequality, then we can reform capitalism. If people amass wealth and we're able to get the wealth back from them and redistribute it, then society will be a better place. Social democrats insist on the state expanding its role into the economy. The state's role can be expanded through regulation, redistribution, and wealth creation. That is what the state will do. Social democrats neither accept a purely market-oriented economy or a centralized one. Rather, they advocate a mixed economy. So the mixed economy is a role for the state and a role for the market. That is what they insist on, social democrats. The mixed economy has private enterprise complemented by public enterprise. Provision of social services and redistribution of wealth is emphasized. The social democratic state is exemplified by Sweden. This is because the country has a mixture of high taxes and extensive social welfare system. The NDC in Ghana considers itself as a social democratic party. The NDC, especially under President Mahama, had a mixture of high taxes and provision of social infrastructure. Social interventions of the NDC included the FCUK, that is FQ, Free Compulsory Universal Basic Education, the LEAP, that is Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty Program, the School Feeding Program, the Free School Standards Program. John Maynard Keynes is the most influential thinker in the state-focused school. He called for an interventionist state to stimulate the economy in periods of unemployment. The view was that a given level of demand will produce a corresponding level of employment. Keynes, however, pointed out that low unemployment during the Depression resulted from low demand. Aggregate demand in an economy is the sum of consumer spending, private investment, and government spending. Keynes contended governments could deal with recession by increasing demand. According to Keynes, recessions can be addressed by reducing taxes to spur consumer or investment spending and increasing government's own spending. Application of Keynes' prescription dealt with the recession and resuscitated ailing economies. Keynes' fiscal policy was successfully put to test during J.F. Kennedy administration in the U.S. in 1961. Keynes' radical ideas influenced modern economic and political thought. Government began to increase taxation. Government also introduced a variety of social programs. These programs aim at addressing inequalities. The high point on Keynes' view is that transformation in our understanding of welfare and redistribution. An interventionist state provides benefit for all. Intervention creates wealth, and welfare is improved. Laissez-faire policy existed prior to the Great Depression. Laissez-faire economists believe that an economy will automatically correct its imbalances. The correction brings about equilibrium in the economy. Demand and supply forces make the economy adjust to inflation without government intervention. Laissez-faire economies see layoffs, bankruptcies, and downturns as things to be avoided. They are part of the natural process of adjustment. The adjustment will restore equilibrium in the economy. Government action was less likely to elevate suffering. It cannot revive economic activity. Rather, it will disrupt the natural restorative power of the market system. These predictions did not come to pass since the Great Depression wreaked havoc in industrial economies. Aggregate spending was very, very low. Unemployment increased sharply. These problems provoked a rethink of the role of the state in the economy. Keynesianism is at odds with capitalism with two contrasting ideas, where two contrasting ideas were coupled together. That is, welfare state measures like health for a healthy workforce and measures concerned with the distribution of wealth. The coupling of opposing ideas posed a risk to capitalism. It was also dangerous to free markets. However, the forces of capitalism have won the battle, while the welfare state has fallen into disfavor. So, the main ideas of the socialists is that, yes, we reject a purely capitalist system, and we also reject a purely collectivist or socialist system, but we want a mixture of these ideologies. Now we have come to the end of this session, and before we leave, let's restate the main points in this lecture. This lecture was about state ideologies and public policy, and we have outlined at least three strands of ideologies. One was the Libertarianism, the second one was Neoliberalism, the third one was socialism, and the fourth one was social democratic ideals or social democracy. Now, libertarian philosophy believes in the state staying away completely from the market and not intervening, and that the individual has a responsibility to find and eke out a living for himself or herself in the market, and that markets are there to function, and if you cannot function, then charity should give you, it should not be the state. That is what they believe, and they believe that taxing is theft, is confiscation, and therefore the state should not tax people. People must go out and eke a living, and that when we do that, the state will be a minimal state, only concentrating on the most important core activities like defense, like law and order, and the rest, so that the state will be a minimal state and leave the rest to the private sector. But there were problems with libertarianism because a purely libertarian philosophy will not work because there will be social misery. And that is why the neoliberals came in and said that, look, we reject a complete hands-off approach to the market. We believe that the state should intervene at the time when the market needs the state. And the time the market needs the state is the time when there is market failure. And when there is market failure, we need the state. The other reform or innovation or refinement that the neoliberals made was that, look, the individual can function in the market only when there are equal opportunities for all in the market. Otherwise, if the playing field is not level, there cannot be equality of opportunity and there will be differential outcomes. For those who cannot, who have no skills, who want to update, who want to upskill, the state must be in the position to help them to retrain and then to develop their skills so that they can become employable again within the market. That is the philosophy, and they believe that there should be minimum taxation so that businesses can function very well and provide what the state actually needs. Then We have what we call socialism. And socialism, others refer to it as collectivism. And collectivism or socialism believe that, look, the state has the right to provide everything, and that this idea of invisible hand of Adam Smith, free market, is nonsense, and that the state must intervene when it must intervene, provided it is going to provide the goods and services for the people. That the state should tax, but when it is taxing, it will use it to provide welfare for everybody. That we must collectively produce and collectively share so that there will be equity in the distribution of what we have produced, so that everybody will have a decent style of existence. The criticism of socialism is that how is the state going to get the market if you say the state should not intervene, the market should not function very well? Where is the money going to come from? Moreover, if overtax businesses, it will be a disincentive to produce more, and therefore they cannot produce efficiently and effectively with high taxes. That is the criticism of socialism. And that socialism is an ideal. It cannot be practicable. And that look at states like Russia, look at other states that have collapsed because of socialism, because the state can no longer have the money to provide the goods and services. Then the Social Democrats then step in and say that, okay, we have an answer, and the answer is that we need a blend of socialism and capitalism. Don't overthrow capitalism. Don't let's say capitalists should go. Let's refine them. We can change them somewhat, but we will change them, refine them, introduce regulation, make them abide by what the market wants, and let them abide by what citizens want and what the state wants. Then we can then complement it by state provision. In that way, we can have a combination of taxes and a combination of provision of goods and services so that everybody in society can have efficient and a decent style of existence. So that is the end of the lecture. Thank you.